Hey everyone, welcome to Data Umbrella's webinar. I'm going to do a brief introduction and then Oriol will give his presentation and then we'll open it up for Q&A. You're welcome to ask any questions in the chat while the presentation is going on, and we'll make sure that they get answered at the end of the webinar. This is being recorded and it will be placed on our YouTube within a day, barring any technical difficulties. A little bit about Data Umbrella. We are a community for underrepresented persons in data science, and we are a nonprofit organization. About me, I'm a statistician. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and GitHub at Reshama S. We have a code of conduct, and we thank you for helping to make this a welcoming, friendly community for all. This is just a reminder based on a couple of the past webinars that we've had, is people will have technical questions that are a bit off topic, and we ask that you please refrain from asking questions that are not related to the webinar. We are unable to provide technical support on other problems during this presentation. There are various ways that you can support Data Umbrella. The first and foremost is to follow our code of conduct. The second is we have a Discord, and the link to the Discord is on our website, and that's where you can answer general questions and share events, jobs, and other things. Another way that you can support Data Umbrella is to donate to our nonprofit. We are on Open Collective under Data Umbrella, and we are also on Benevity. Benevity is a platform that has company match enabled. So if you work really for any of the large or even medium-sized companies like Google and Microsoft and Nike, they all match 100%. We have a YouTube, we have a lot of playlists in YouTube, and one of them is contributing to open source. Another is career advice. And other playlists are data visualization. We have the PyMC series. We have Scikit-Learn Sprint, and I'll share the link to that in the chat. This is just a sampling of some of the events that we've had. On our website, we have a lot of resources. In fact, I was just chatting with Oriol prior to this webinar, and I was asking how he found his way to Data Umbrella, and he found some information through a website. There is a list of communities there, which is also my personal website. But there are a lot of, if you're interested in inclusivity and making your community more welcoming, there's a lot of resources on our website at dataumbrella.org. We are on all social media platforms as Data Umbrella. The ones that are highlighted, Twitter and LinkedIn, we're very active. Meetup is the place to join for upcoming events. YouTube is where all of our webinars are posted, and we have as well a blog and newsletter. We have live captioning available on our platform, which is called Big Marker. If you go to the very top, there are two letters, CC for closed captioning. If you click on that, you can pick a language to see the captioning at the bottom of the video. I have heard that the English is pretty decent in terms of accuracy of transcript. The other languages are maybe a little less perfect, but you can check it out. We have some upcoming events, and this is this is actually a special event because we have a speaker from PyMC, and we are doing Data Umbrella in collaboration with PyMC is organizing a sprint, which is a hackathon to contribute to PyMC and open source. So February 11th, which is this Friday from today, there is a 1-hour sprint office hours. And that information is on our Meetup, and I will also share that on the chat. The sprint is on February 18th through 19th. It's 2 hours each day. And a week after the sprint, which is February 25th, we're having post-sprint office hours. And that's an opportunity to join and ask any questions that you have, whether it's installation or really anything at all, or to get to know the maintainers of the library. The sprint, I mentioned, it's February 18th, Friday, 2 to 4 p.m. Mino and Oriol, who are both on the PyMC side organizing the sprint, will be here at the end of this webinar to answer any questions you have about the sprint. So, if you have it, just make a list of them. We're happy to answer them. And today's talk is contributing to PyMC documentation. Our speaker is Oriol. Oriol is a Bayesian statistics and open source software enthusiast currently pursuing a PhD in computer science at Helsinki University in Finland. He's also a member of the RVISE and PyMC teams. And with that, I am going to hand over the microphone and video to Oriol.
Hello, everyone. I hope my screen can be seen. I am now sharing the page that I have with all the content to guide a little bit this webinar, which is on the website that we have for the sprint series. So this webinar will be about contributing to PyMC documentation, which is a bit complex because PyMC is quite a large library, and it also has a lot of documentation, which has both good and bad things. Good is because very probably your questions are answered there. Bad because it is so big that it is quite hard to navigate. And we have been working extensively during the last months, thanks to Outreachy and Google Season of Docs programs, and so on. I saw Martina joining the webinar. She helped us thanks to Google Season of Docs, and part of the work that and improvements we'll see now are thanks to her. So I will start with an overview of the PyMC documentation and how it is structured, and then I will focus on contributing to PyMC examples, which is, in my opinion, the main documentation resource for PyMC. But I will also try to give an overview about why the website is like it is and why I think it's nice and important to have it that way, but I cannot cover how to configure your documentation, for example, to look like that, because that would be a whole other webinar. So basically, PyMC has the documentation divided into two websites. One website is the version documentation, which is the documentation for the library itself, and it has this API reference and so on. And then there's these PyMC examples, which builds into a different website, which is a collection of Jupyter notebooks that are examples, tutorials, case studies about using PyMC, and in-depth explanations about some topics and so on. So this resource has been built throughout the years by PyMC contributors, developers, power users who wrote blogs and then had these blog posts imported into the example collection and curated progressively throughout the years. And right now we have over 90 notebooks in the collection. So it is quite hard to keep up to date and to maintain and everything. And this is why contributions to this PyMC example repo are very, very welcome. So as I said, we had several issues, and the PyMC users had a lot of issues navigating this resource. So we started thinking about what to do from all of these 90 notebooks to make it something that is useful, easy to navigate, and you can use to find answers to all your questions about PyMC. hopefully. So this is what we started discussing around, I think it was March, May last year. And we started with this wish list. We wanted something that was easy to write, that the pages and notebooks were easy to execute, and we also want the code to run years from now, so we need to list all the dependencies. We want it to be browsable via tags and categories, because notebooks can be split into many different ways because of the functions of PyMC they use, because of the topics they cover, so on and so forth. So we cannot define a single tree structure to navigate it. Also, obviously searchable, easy to cite, because all you learn from there. It is nice to cite and to acknowledge the authors. It is also good to have this automatic table of contents, things like that, so on. And obviously try to automate whatever can be automated, so that we do not have to repeat ourselves too much when writing this kind of notebooks. So what we decided was to use Jupyter Notebook plus Sphinx, which is a static site generator designed for Python documentation, and also can be extended with custom libraries that allow Sphinx to be very, very powerful and very flexible. And this is what we did. So easy to write. As we said, we use this Jupyter. So we basically write in Markdown and some extensions that we'll cover later, which are called this MyST syntax. Easy to execute. They are Jupyter Notebook, so all the pages are 100% executable, browsable via tags and categories. So we use a special Sphinx extensions for that, which allows us to add some metadata to each of the blog posts with tags, categories, the authors, and so on and so forth. Searchable by itself, and from the version docs you can also search into the example gallery. Citable thanks to Zenodo. Again, the metadata from the blog has the authors, so we can make it easy to acknowledge those authors. We have this automatic table of contents via the specific Sphinx theme, which is also working on accessibility, making sure that the page can be navigated, for example, using only keywords and not needing the mouse, that it's easy to add all alternative text for images and captions and so on. And then we also automated multiple things. So here is what you can see. So this is what an example page used to look like. It is very similar to a Jupyter Notebook, barely anything else added to that. You just have code and images and text scattered throughout here, but now pages look like this. So you start by having these badges on the top, so that you can launch this notebook and execute it on Binder or on Colab. You can see the source on GitHub. You have the categories of each of the pages. So if you click here, you go to the posts in the beginner category. You have all the tags used throughout the collection, and you have the tags that are specific to this notebook. You have the table of contents, which is automatic, and so on and so forth. And you can see that this is also a bit nicer. We can hide some content at will, and we also have this end of the section with references, with the see also, with the authors listed here, the watermark with all the libraries that we use, and a license notice, so that you know that these galleries are all published under the MIT license. So You can modify it, you can redistribute, you can work on it, use it for your courses, for whatever, as long as you provide the copyright to the original authors and keep the license notices. And we also have this, which has some reference on how to cite that, and we have this unique DOI provided by Zenodo, so you can cite these pages as a part of a collection in this PyMC examples book-like resource. And so now we will focus on how do we make pages that look like this into pages that look like this. So there's a part that is automated, as I have explained, but sadly not everything can be automated, and we still need a lot of contributions and a lot of effort to bring all of the notebooks into this style and this standard of quality. So we could have all that, but we're still far from there. So now I will cover with a bit of detail the main things that you need to know in order to help us in making these updates from old style notebooks into book-like quality collection of notebooks. So as I said, the main tool that we use is this MyST syntax, which stands for markedly structured text. This is basically a superset of Markdown, which basically means that whatever you write in Markdown, and you can write in GitHub issues or places like that on Discourse, for example, if you use PyMC Discord or a Discourse. Discord, I think, uses Markdown too. I'm not very sure about that, but there are a lot of places that use Markdown, so everything that is Markdown is also valid MyST, but in order to add extra features so that we can have all of these nice book-like quality pages, we need to extend Markdown. So MyST provides some extra syntaxes. One of these syntaxes are targets. So you can add this target ID, and the target ID can be the title of the notebook, can be a bullet point, can be things like that. And you will see some examples below. And then you can reference the target ID by the ID. So you don't need to remember the file. You can link to bullet points, even to subsections, and so on, which is very convenient. We can also have math like you would have in Jupyter Notebooks, but you wouldn't, for example, in GitHub. So you can use $1 for inline math, $2 for block expressions, and unlike on Jupyter Notebook or in Discourse, for example, you can add this extra label after the block math style, so that the equation gets assigned a label and this number, so that we can then reference these equations from the text and have a link that points to that equation. And how do we take advantage of all these references? So we do that by a thing which are called roles. Roles provide a way to specify arbitrary inline features for Sphinx to use. So the base syntax is this one: role name between curly brackets, then backticks, and the role content. And we can use that, for example, for cross-referencing, which is clearly the most important use they have, but they can also be used for formatting inline content, which is also useful in some occasions. So here are several examples of cross-referencing roles which have this default syntax, and then if the target is associated to a, let's say, caption, like if the target points to a title, then the title is considered the caption. If but then using this generates a link that has the text of the caption and points to the right place. But we can also use this syntax with the target hidden here between angle brackets and modify the text that we want to be shown. So what types of cross-referencing roles? That means what can we use as this role name parameter. So we can use ref and numref to link to manually created targets, either with the ID syntax that we showed before. Figures have a target or name argument that we can also use to reference them. And other objects can have this name or caption that we can also use. Then we have doc role, which is to link to specific files. Sorry about that. To specific files, and then we, instead of using these targets that we have defined manually, we use the file names for that, but without the extension. There's also a term role to link to terms that we have defined in the glossary. Then we have roles that allow us to link to Python objects that we have documented by their name. So we can link to a module, let's say PyMC.timeSeries. We just use this mod for module and then PyMC.timeSeries as a target, and we get automatically a reference that points to the right API page. We can also use those for citations. As I showed in the example, we had nice LaTeX-like citations, so we can use this cite P to generate the citation between parentheses, or cite T to generate the citation as a textual citation without parentheses. And then there's also the EQ role for targets. So here are some examples of this cross-referencing. So if we point to these docs /idea, I generated a target at this title, and you can check that from the source of the page. Actually, if we go to edit this page here, you will see that this idea and executable, both made from blog post, has this target defined right above it, which is where we have gone. We can also add a custom text, but as we use the same target, it still points to the same place. Then we can link to the equation because we labeled it. We can link to other pages and to a specific bullet point. Here, I also labeled this bullet point, and you can see that again here. There is a target that is right above the PyMC bullet point, so the reference points to this specific bullet point. And you can see that when I click on it, I go straight to the bullet point, not to the list, but to the bullet point at hand, which can be very nice, for example, for how-to guides and itemized lists where you want to reference specific items and things like that. Then we have references to PyMC objects. It's PyMC, then there's this normal. If you want to exclude all the extra import path, let's say, and leave only the name, we can use this tilde sign at the beginning. We can also, again, use normal distribution things like that. And then there are also some cases, for example, here, when we link to the term, we are not actually linking to this website where the content is, but we are linking to the PyMC website. So we use this before a colon, an identifier of the website we want to link it to. And we have a mapping of different names that target different websites. And all of this is configured for you, so you just need to know which aliases to use to link to the PyMC, to link to the example notebook website, to link to the RV's website, for instance, to the Python main documentation, even things like that. And here we are also linking to the Python, to the PyMC website, because this is where that is documented. But as the target already includes this PyMC, we can skip that because we are sure that the target at the label will be unique. As I said, we can also use this for formatting. So we can use this abbreviation role so that when I stop here, I get the acronym expanded. We can generate badges with that, inline icons from different sources, and so on. But these are not very important. The far more important ones are these cross-referencing roles. Then we also have directive, which are like the equivalent of roles, but instead of for inline content, these provide block or paragraph features. These are very diverse and can have very different functions. They can be used from generating table of contents, defining the hierarchy tree of the website, to figures, or to anything like that. So the base syntax of a directive is this 3 colons, then the directive name, again in curly brackets, a main argument, some keyword arguments, and the main content of the directive, which is generally prose, but it is not necessarily prose. It can be different things. And any of these 3 can be optional. The only one that is always necessary is the directive name. So one example of directive that is important is this figure directive. So here what we do basically is we have this figure MD directive. We assign imposter as its main argument. This is what is used by MyST to automatically generate a target that points to this figure, and we can link to it by using this imposter target. Then we add the image in standard markdown syntax. This is nice because this means that the image gets rendered both in raw markdown when you are working in the Jupyter Notebook, and also it gets rendered as a figure in the website. And then we can add a caption, which is here prose content, can have markdown formatting, and they must be a single paragraph. So here I added a figure, and you can see that it has a caption, and that the content that I add here is generated as alt text, which I don't know how to see without a screen reader, but if you go to the website and you have the link, you can check that there is indeed alt text on this image that comes from here, and is not imposter syndrome, but it's a much more specific description of what the image is. Here we have a link to the image, and we have used this numref syntax so that instead of using the caption or whatever specific text, it just generates the figure 1 link. So I added that because I wanted to speak about the figure directive, but I also chose this image specifically because I think it's important to be aware of this. And it's also a link to Melissa's talk that you have the link here, which is another webinar of organized by Data Umbrella. And if you want to know how to set up Sphinx for your own website or your own Python library, is the talk to watch. So she uses this image, and I also wanted to use this image because I think that PyMC examples is nearly perfect crystallization of this concept, because this is a collaborative resource built by many people along many years. So it covers a huge bubble of content that I don't think there's anyone even within the PyMC team that knows even half of everything that is covered there. And it's just that every team member has added their bubble of expertise so that we ended up covering a huge bubble. So if you do not understand everything in the example notebooks, do not worry, we don't either. At least I don't either. I generally focus on reviews that have to do with RVs, that have to do with things and things like that. But there are many things related to code or to specific statistical tools like Gaussian processes or time series that I do not completely understand, and it's perfectly fine. Another useful directive is the admonition directive, which is same style, but this case it has a name which has several options that you can see here. There's the link, but we will not get into it. And then it has some text, and this basically generates this cool box so that you can focus the attention of the readers on this box and make sure that even if they are skimming the content, their eyes get attracted to this specific block and they don't miss this note or tip or warning or whatever. And there are many other directives with varying degrees of relevance to our case. There are 3 more directives that are very important for PyMC and are covered in detail on the PyMC Jupyter style guide, which is where we will go now, because it is also important, I think, that you start getting acquainted with the multiple references that we have on the topic, both so that we don't repeat ourselves and also because it is very hard to keep everything centralized, because maybe the people of Read the Docs have a very good guide on cross-referencing, the people who develop MyST have a very good guide on directives, but we cannot write, even if we could write a centralized guide with cross-referencing directives and so on and so forth, it wouldn't be as good as either of the two. So we just link to one, link to the other, and write only about the things that are specific to our use case. So here is the Jupyter style guide, which is part of the PyMC main documentation. Here, consider using markdown figures, which we have covered already, but you can see that this link goes to the MyST documentation. Here, never use links, and this points to Read the Docs documentation, and so on and so forth. So one of the very important directives is the post directive, which is not part of a Sphinx itself and is provided by this extension that I called Epilogue. This is a directive that needs to be present in all of the notebooks, and it isn't yet. And we need this because this is how we add the metadata about the tags, about the category, about who are the authors, and so on. Because without that, we cannot take advantage of all the automatization that we have afterwards to generate the tags, to generate the automatic citation advice at the bottom, and so on. Then we have the references. So we have already covered that we can use citation roles that look like this: cite P in curly brackets, or cite T, depending on what you want to do. And then we have a directive to gather all these citations automatically and generate the references like we have here. One to the references that we have used, and this is done automatically by Sphinx thanks to the BibTeX extension. And what we need to do is to add this bibliography that doesn't list the citations because they have already been cited. It just tells the Sphinx to gather the citations and print them here at the reference section. It can also take some, in this case, non-prose main content, in addition to this filter argument. And in this case, we can list extra IDs that we want to be shown in the bibliography, even though they have not been cited within the main text. And finally, we have the epilogue, which we include a template that we have for the page footer, so that basically we get this license notice and this citing PyMC examples automatically generated. If you look at the source of this notebook, which we can easily do by going to this view on GitHub, you can see that the watermark is the last section in the notebook. We only have this include, and thanks to this include, all of the other sections get generated, and they have the specific authors of this notebook, not just someone, and they have the title and everything. So, but again, that this is all automated, so you only need to care about this include directive. Let's go back to the main page. These are the most important conventions that we have for the site. And is this working? Okay, here. Back again. Let me stop sharing my screen. Yeah. Okay, so let's go over the questions, which I have consciously ignored so that I didn't get sidetracked and had time to finish with enough time to answer questions.
Sure. So there are a couple of questions. In the meantime, if anybody else has any questions, please post it in the chat and we will answer them. So the first question that somebody had was, why are PyMC and PyMC-example separate repos? NumPyro, for example, has it all in the main repo.
So we have them on separate repositories for several reasons. Mostly because of two reasons. One is because the example gallery for PyMC is huge. As I said, this is over 90 notebooks, and they make the repository of the main PyMC a bit too big to manage comfortably and make installation from GitHub very slow and things like that. And also because as this is such a huge collection, we cannot keep it synced with the releases that we do, so that when we release version 3.11, for example, all the notebooks are not executed with 3.11 because this takes a huge amount of time, and some might break because of PyMC changes, but also because of external dependency changes and so on. And there are even single notebooks that take over a day to run on a cluster. So we cannot expect, given our resources and size of the team and general availability, to keep this synced. So we basically separate them so that we have version documentation for the library, and the API documentation is specific to the version that you are looking at. But the PyMC examples are not version, and we simply make a screenshot or a snapshot, or I don't know the right name in English, every 3-4 months, so that people who are writing a book or things like that can cite stable reference. But in general, you should just look at the latest PyMC examples, because as the notebooks get updated, the website also gets updated, so that you see always the latest examples executed with the latest version.
So a question that I had actually was, Sphinx and a lot of the examples that you showed, and I guess they're called directives, are quite, they're really like significant in the whole open source Python ecosystem. And I was wondering if you could just sort of elaborate on that, because I've contributed to scikit-learn and I see some things that are a little bit more familiar, and other things maybe I saw and I didn't understand it, and I do understand it better now. And sort of elaborating a bit on the importance of understanding this, which gives people ability and knowledge to contribute to a number of open source projects.
Yeah. So most of the PyMC world uses Sphinx to generate their documentation. There's also some libraries that use mkdocs, which is Markdown only, but most libraries do use Sphinx, which supports restructured text natively and has also multiple extensions to use Markdown with it. MyST being the most important one, but then there's also MyST Notebook and NB Sphinx to render notebooks into Sphinx documentation. And the way to interact with Sphinx is via these roles and directives, which can be used from Markdown thanks to MyST, or from restructured text. And they are the things that allow us to specify this special format, and also to give instructions to Sphinx about things that are not visible in the documentation. So for example, if I share my screen again, and we go here, we go to the home page, and you see that we have all these pages: installation, learning, examples, API reference, so on. So you go to learning, and then you have left tree of contents, and we have some notebooks, we have books, we have videos, then we have the API reference, which again has some tree, and we have continuous distributions and all the distributions listed here. This hierarchical structure of the website is defined not from the file structure of the content, but specifically via a directive called doctree. So Sphinx can set the hierarchy that we want, and we also have extensions to generate this hierarchy automatically for modules and for classes, and to document all the methods of each class and things like that. So directives are a key part of Sphinx, and there are some directives, as I have mentioned, that are specific to some extensions, Like we covered this post directive here, Jupyter Style Guide for self. This post directive is specific to this Epilogue extension, so you can only use it for the with libraries that have this Epilogue extension activated in their Sphinx configuration, but admonitions or figure or things like that are general Sphinx uh, directives that can be used in any library that uses Sphinx. So if you then want to contribute to NumPy documentation, to scikit-learn, to any other library that uses Sphinx to build the documentation, you can take most of what we have covered here about cross-referencing roles, about targets, about directives, and go there and help contribute and improve their documentation. This is not completely specific to PyMC.
There's another question, which is it fine to make a pull request and then use the generated live preview link to check how it looks rendered?
Sorry.
Is it okay to make a pull request and then use the generated live preview link to check how it looks rendered?
Yes, it is perfectly fine, and it can be a bit tricky to generate the documentation locally. And as we have so many notebooks, it can also take a bit of time. So even though it's a bit faster to do it locally, it is not that fast. So it's perfectly fine to do that, and it's much easier for your setup. So feel free to send a pull request as a very early draft, only so you can see the preview on Read the Docs.
So there is a couple of questions about the sprint. And so the first one is, do you welcome any examples, or do you only want examples that use PyMC features that lack documentation? Do PyMC have calls for examples?
We welcome any example, but we have a process, so you should first submit an issue with the proposal tag. You will see that we have a template for the proposals to add to PyMC examples, because it is fine to add notebooks that go more in depth about things that are already covered by the documentation, things that also have a page in the API reference and things like that, but we do not want to duplicate content. So we need to make sure that the new pages that we add, even if covering the same topic, are complementary to the pages that we already have.
So the next question is also on the sprint, and maybe Mina would like to join here. The question, I'll read it out loud, is, more generally for the sprint, do the devs have ideas on where they want us to contribute? Otherwise, it's a bit difficult to know what issue to start on.
Yes. So we have a very specific page that we want you to be the first one you read to get started contributing, which is this your first contribution to PyMC, which is making some updates to a docstring. I am sending the link now on the chat. And so basically what we thought with Mina when we were talking about the sprint is that we are trying to split the contribution complexity, let's say, into two parts. One thing that can often be a problem is all the tooling and infrastructure and things that come along with contributing to PyMC. We have continuous integration and checks about style and tests and several other things that you need to take into account, but are generally unrelated to the actual content, let's say, of your contribution. So that's why we have written this very detailed guide so that you do some small but very important changes to the doc strings, so they are formatted much better and are much more useful than what they are now, because then the content of the contribution is very clear and specific, and if you have any issue, it will most probably be with the tooling, and it will help you get comfortable very quickly with our tooling, with GitHub, with continuous integration, style checks, and these kind of things. And as we know exactly what you're doing at all times, we will be able to help you, uh, hopefully without much difficulty. And then once you have done that, you can move to more, let's say, long and developed content contributions, because you should probably not have more issues than the ones you already had with the tooling.
Nino, do you want to make a plug for the sprint here?
So yes, hello everybody. So basically, Oriol has already told you a couple of things about the sprint, and additionally, we'll be having office hours before and after the sprint. The sprint will be held in 2 sessions, 2 hours each, and mostly, I think I've heard some doubts about the kind of contributions that you can make, the example notebooks, etc. So yes, I mean you're totally free to try out things, and we'll try our best to help you out, but just as a form of advice, we'll be shortlisting some issues and we'll be putting them up, which are issues that are more easily approachable, which we can help you with in the limited time that's available, because the sprint is of 2 hours. So I think you would have a better time if you pick up a small doable issue and resolve it in that given time frame and merge your pull request, because it's a good feeling when you just see your first pull request merged. So yes, and in the pre-sprint office hours, we'll help you out with things like, is my environment set up okay, installation problems, or just general doubts about the sprint. So those timings, they will be sent to you in the Meetup newsletter. I mean, you can already see them on the website if you go to PyMC dataumbrella.xyz, and I'll just send the link here. So yes, when you click on the sprint section, there is an area called sprint schedule, and you can see that there's registration for pre-sprint office hours and post-sprint office hours. So I think that would really help us make this whole process more useful for you, because after the sprint we can get some feedback and we can make changes on the things that we can do better. And pre-sprint, if there are things that you're wary of, that this might go wrong, or I'm not comfortable with this, so how can I get more help about this? Say you have some trouble with GitHub, like all of us, whenever we're learning it at the beginning, it's a little tricky, and so we can just send you some resources, and hopefully, so the whole point is to make the experience in the sprint as smooth as possible, because it's of a limited time. So it's really nice to be prepared beforehand. So yes, I hope to see many of you there.
So if anybody has any more questions while we have the PyMC team online, feel free to ask. I'll wait a few minutes, and then we will end the webinar. And while I'm waiting for any more questions, I just, happy to share that I went through the docstring tutorial to set up my virtual environment and such. And I have a Mac, so it was pretty straightforward. I didn't have any difficulties. It depends, how your system is configured and such, but I was able to go through the docstring tutorial as well. So. And I guess what I could do is I can share a link to my video that just goes through the steps. I'll do that while we're waiting for any questions.
The link is also on the website. So if you go to the link I shared, pymcdataumbrella.xyz docstring tutorial, we have a link to Reshama's video. Also, while we wait, I can also share my screen so that you can get an idea of how very simple changes into the documentation can have a large impact. So this is the old documentation for the uniform distribution, and we have this mathematical formula and a plot and so on. And then we have these parameters which say lower float, upper float. Here floats, it is clear what they mean, but doing very couple changes like adding a space between lower and the colon and so on, we get to something that looks like this, which is the same plot, the same everything, but here float is now clickable and it points to the documentation of the actual object in the PyMC docs. And this is much more relevant if we are using complicated objects like RBs objects or ISR objects that are sometimes ambiguous. And then we also have this optional now and defaults to 0, which wasn't documented before. So you know that you can simply write PyMC uniform without any arguments, and it will default to a uniform distribution between 0 and 1.
So yes, that's that. And this was like the last webinar that we had in our entire series, where we had like 4 webinars to help you contribute to PyMC and take part in the sprint. And Oriol did a great job here. So yes, we hope you come to the sprint, and it's a nice experience where you can contribute to PyMC, learn a few things. We can learn a few things from your experience.
All right, thank you both so very much. I'm looking forward to the office hours coming up and this sprint. And this video will be posted hopefully within 24 hours. Thank you.